"My son built this entire platform," my father told the investors, smiling while my brother nodded beside him. Cameras flashed. I just sat there, hands locked under the table. No, that's not where this story begins. It began 5 years earlier in a small Kansas City apartment lit by the glow of my monitor, the room smelling like burnt coffee and deadlines. A single hard drive sat beside me. Every line of code, every patent, every late-night fix with my name on it. That drive was supposed to secure my future, but that night it became proof of what I'd lost. And that folder would expose every lie they built. I used to think building something with my family would be the safest bet. You grow up believing loyalty is the foundation, that blood means protection. Turns out it just means they know exactly where to cut you deepest. Back then, I was 25, fresh out of grad school, a software engineer in Kansas City. I'd turned down 2 job offers from big tech firms because my father said, "Why build someone else's dream when we can build ours?" It sounded noble. I wanted to believe him. He had the connections, the money, the charisma that filled every room. I had the skill, the code, the logic, the quiet grind that kept systems running when everyone else was asleep. Our first office was a narrow floor above a laundromat. The windows rattled when the dryers spun below. I remember that smell, detergent and burnt coffee, and how proud I felt setting up my first server rack with my father watching. He called it Dawson Tech. He said it like a promise, 50-50 partnership. He told me equal share, equal credit. I didn't even ask for paperwork then. He was my dad. Paper felt unnecessary. My mother would visit with homemade sandwiches, fussing over how pale I looked. She'd hum as she set them down, always checking if I'd eaten. Ethan would show up sometimes after work, sleeves rolled up, phone buzzing non-stop with his clients. He was charming, effortless, the kind of guy who called waiters by name and remembered birthdays. My father loved that about him, said he had leadership energy. I had the quiet kind, the kind people didn't notice until something broke. In those early months, everything ran on hope and caffeine. I'd pull all-nighters debugging authentication issues, half the time coding with one hand and holding a slice of cold pizza with the other. My father would pop in at midnight, pat my shoulder and say, "You're a machine, Claire." I'd smile even when my wrists itched. That praise meant more than any paycheck, but even then small things started to slip. When reporters came for interviews, he'd say, "We built this system together." When investors toured the office, he'd pull Ethan into the photos, the family faces of innovation. I was always behind the screen, literally. I told myself it didn't matter. What mattered was the work. I thought the results would speak for themselves. Our Sunday dinners became status updates. My father would talk about expansion, acquisitions, funding rounds. Ethan would talk about client conversions. When I tried to explain our new back-end framework, my mother would glance at her watch and say, "Let's not talk about computers during dinner." My father would laugh and pour more wine. "She's always in her own world," he'd say. Everyone would laugh and I'd laugh too, pretending it didn't sting. Still, I stayed late, pushed harder, built cleaner systems. I told myself I was laying bricks for a future that would finally prove my worth, not as his daughter but as his equal. Every line of code was proof. Every patent draft, every architecture diagram, I saved copies under my name, not because I didn't trust him but because I was thorough. That's what engineers do. We prepare for failure before it happens. The day we moved into the new downtown office, he gave a speech. From a tiny room above a laundromat to this, he said, arms wide, the city skyline glowing behind him. "We're a family business built on trust." Everyone clapped. I stood in the back, smiling, exhausted, believing every word. Looking back, that's where the first cracks appeared. Hairline fractures, no one noticed. My father started introducing Ethan as the face of Dawson Tech. I became our lead developer. The title shift was small, almost invisible, but it carried weight. I kept telling myself it was fine. Titles don't build systems, people do. I had my coffee, my code, my drive. I thought loyalty would protect me. But loyalty without recognition is just silence, and silence has a way of turning into a razor. I didn't know it yet, but that silence was already rewriting my story. It didn't happen all at once. Favoritism rarely does. It creeps in, quietly disguised as strategy, practicality, optics. My father started taking Ethan to meetings I used to lead. "Investors respond better to him," he said once, adjusting his cuff links. "He's got that easy charm you can't teach." I wanted to argue that charm doesn't write code or debug a system at 3:00 a.m., but I just nodded. Soon, emails about partnerships stopped, including my name. Announcements in the company newsletter started reading project led by Ethan Dawson. The first time I saw it, my stomach dropped. I told myself it was a typo. The second time I knew better. At home, my mother talked about how proud she was of the boys. She didn't mean it cry, but every word landed like gravel in my chest. "Your father and Ethan are such a team." she said, one Sunday dinner passing the potatoes. It's wonderful to see them working side by side. I looked at my hands, fingers still lined with the faint red marks from the keyboard. Yeah, I said, wonderful. Ethan thrived in the attention. He was good at making himself seem indispensable, staying late just long enough to be seen asking me casual questions about projects, then quoting my answers in meetings as his own insight. Once I caught him using a slide deck I'd designed from scratch. My initials were still in the footer. I watched him present it to a client while my father nodded proudly beside him. Not once did either of them look my way. Afterward, I confronted my father in the hallway. Dad, that was my work. He sighed as if I were a child who didn't understand the world. Claire, perception matters. People invest in leadership, not labor. Ethan represents the vision. You're the backbone and every company needs one. You should be proud. Backbones don't get introduced, I said quietly. He frowned. You're emotional. Don't be emotional about business. That line, don't be emotional, it stuck to me like a rule I wasn't allowed to break. The shift at work became impossible to ignore. Ethan got a corner office with glass walls. My cubicle stayed the same next to the hum of the server room where no one ever visited. When investors toured, my father made sure Ethan led the walkthroughs. He's the future, he'd tell them. The words slid off his tongue easily like they'd been practiced. The staff followed his lead. People who once came to me with technical questions now waited for Ethan's approval. He said we should delay the roll-out. One of the developers told me, did you agree? I didn't. But arguing would only make me look difficult. That's how women in tech disappear, not because they fail but because they're labeled inconvenient. There was a day late fall I remember when my father handed Ethan a company credit card during a team lunch. Use it for business dinners, travel, whatever you need. He didn't look at me once. I was sitting right there, still paying my own expenses out of pocket. The waitress brought the check to him, assuming he was the boss. He didn't correct her. I drove home that night with my headlights reflecting off wet pavement, the city glowing gold and cruel. I told myself it was fine, that maybe this was temporary, that my work would speak louder eventually. But deep down I knew I was building something solid while they built a story. And in business the story always sells first. Still, I stayed. I kept working, coding, documenting, because part of me believed that if I just held on long enough the truth would find its way out. But truth doesn't just appear, it has to be dragged into the light. The final crack came on a Thursday morning, ordinary enough to hide a betrayal that would split everything open. I got an email from a restaurant downtown confirming the cancellation of my seat for that night's investor dinner, Miss Dawson. It said your reservation was removed by your office. My office? I hadn't touched it. I walked straight into my father's office. He was on the phone, laughing his suit jacket off. Ethan sitting across from him, scrolling through his laptop like he owned the place. Why wasn't I invited tonight? I asked. He covered the receiver with his hand, looked up and smiled politely the way he did with employees. It's a casual event, Claire, more of a social thing. You wouldn't enjoy it. Social thing, I repeated, for investors. He waved a hand. You're more of the technical type. Let Ethan handle the people's side. Ethan didn't even look guilty. It's not personal, he said. They just want to meet the faces of the company, the faces. As if my code, my architecture, my patents were faceless. That night I drove past the restaurant. Anyway, through the glass I saw them. My father in his navy suit, Ethan beside him, laughing with the investors I'd spent years emailing, solving problems for saving projects that would have collapsed without me. They toasted with wine while I sat in my car across the street, engine running, the reflection of their smiles flickering across my windshield. I should have gone home. Instead, I drove to my parents' house. The porch light was still on. My mother opened the door, surprised. Dinner's in the oven, she said. Your father just called. They're celebrating the partnership. Partnership, I asked. She nodded, proud. $50 million. Ethan will be CEO when your father steps down. Isn't that wonderful? For a moment I couldn't breathe. I walked into the dining room. The table was already set for Sunday. Plates, candles, the usual ritual. My childhood photo still hung on the walls, me at science fairs, me holding my first laptop. Proof that I'd been there from the start. Proof no one cared to remember. I sat down in my old chair. My mother poured tea. I know this is hard for you, she said gently, but your father's just being practical. You'll still have a role, I repeated like an employee. She hesitated. He said you'd get a generous severance if you decide to move on. The sound that left my throat wasn't a laugh, but it wasn't quiet either. She flinched. Claire, don't make this about pride. But it was never about pride. It was about existence, about being written out of my own story while everyone smiled and called it business. I stood up. The chair legs scraped the floor. My mother tried to touch my arm. He loves you, you know. I looked around the house, every photo, every trophy, every trace of my years, then at her soft, uncertain eyes. If that's love, I don't need it. I left. Before she could answer, back at the office the lights were off. The city outside the glass walls shimmered cold and metallic. My desk looked smaller than ever. I turned on my monitor and opened the corporate restructuring document that had been left on my keyboard earlier that day. I hadn't read it yet. There it was. Ethan Dawson, co-founder and CTO. Claire Dawson, senior developer. 3 words erased. 5 years. Something inside me went still. Not angry, not broken, just still. Like water before a storm, that moment flipped a switch in me. I didn't argue, didn't cry, didn't call anyone. I just opened a new folder on my desktop and started saving every file, every log, every patent under a single name. Mine. I didn't go back to the office for 2 days. No calls, no emails, nothing, just quiet. The kind that presses against your ribs until you either scream or change. I chose the second. The third night I turned my apartment into a war room. Laptop screens glowed across the kitchen table. Folders spread like battle maps, contracts, patent filings, contribution logs, every receipt of who had truly built Dawson Tech. 5 years of data, dates, code, commits, timestamps. My proof, my protection. I called one person, Megan Liu. We'd met at a conference years ago, bonding over coffee and burnout. She answered on the second ring. I was waiting for this call, she said. I think they're selling the company without me, I told her. You know they are, she replied. The question is, what do you want to do about it? We met the next morning at a small cafe near Union Station. She wore a grey blazer, tablet in hand, eyes sharp. I slid the flash drive across the table. Everything's here. She plugged it in, scrolling. Claire, you have them cornered. The patents list you as sole inventor. The partnership contract says equal ownership. If they move forward with that sale, they're violating federal IP law. The words didn't sound real, so I can stop it. You can block the sale, force a buyout, or expose them publicly. Your choice. I stared at the steam rising from my coffee. My reflection wavered inside it, tired but clear. Then we'll stop it, I said. Over the next week we built our case the same way I built software, systematically, one line at a time. Megan drafted a cease and desist letter, attached exhibits of proof. I organized every file like I was debugging the story they'd tried to overwrite. Every bug led back to them. Every fix led back to me. Meanwhile, my father's confidence grew louder. He held meetings, laughed in hallways, spoke of closing day like it was already history. Ethan strutted around like a CEO in training, new watch, glinting under fluorescent light. No one looked at me anymore, which suited me perfectly. I'd mastered invisibility. People don't notice the person collecting evidence. I worked late every night. Sometimes I'd pause, hearing the city hum outside my window. For the first time, the noise didn't make me anxious. It steadied me. I wasn't reacting anymore, I was planning. Megan called the night before the investor presentation. Tomorrow's your moment, you ready? I looked at my screen, rows of folders labeled by year, project, patent. I've been ready for 5 years, I said. The next morning I arrived at the conference early. The lobby smelled like polished marble and nerves. My father stood near the podium rehearsing. Ethan checked his tie in the reflection of a glass wall. They didn't notice me sit in the back row with Megan. When the presentation began, it was like déjà vu. My diagrams, my architecture, my words, all spoken through Ethan's mouth. Investors nodded, impressed, until one woman asked, "Can you explain the encryption layer?" Ethan blinked. "It's optimized for efficiency." She frowned. "How exactly?" He faltered. My father jumped in, changing the topic. Megan leaned toward me. Now she whispered. I stood up. My voice didn't shake. "I can explain that," I said. Heads turned. My father froze, since I'm the one who designed it. The room went silent. Megan handed out copies of the legal letter as I connected my laptop to the projector. The screen filled with facts. Code commits 47,000 lines by Claire Dawson, 0 by Ethan. Patent filing 7, all under my name. The original partnership contract highlighted in yellow, equal credit and ownership. The investor's expression shifted from confusion to fury. One closed his laptop, another whispered to an aide. My father's voice cracked. "This is a misunderstanding." "No," I said, calm, "it's documentation." By the end of the day, the sale collapsed. IP ownership concerns, legal exposure, investors withdrew. 2 weeks later, Megan negotiated my buyout, $20 million for full rights to the code. I signed the papers with steady hands. My father didn't show. Ethan didn't call. 6 months passed. I started my own company, smaller, smarter, mine alone. 2 of the same investors reached out offering funding. They said they'd never seen someone defend their work with such precision. I smiled. Precision was always my language. I named the company True North Systems. The first product I launched bore only one signature, my own. And when I saw the first payment hit my account, I didn't celebrate. I just sat in the quiet, feeling the peace of something finally done right. The message came late one night, just a single line from my father: "We should talk as a family." I stared at it until the screen dimmed. No apology, no acknowledgement, just an invitation back to the same table where I'd been erased. I deleted it without replying. A week later, Ethan sent a text. Didn't think it'd go this far. That one I left unread. I wasn't angry anymore, just done. The world kept turning. Dawson stumbled without its backbone. The headlines shifted from praise to confusion. Ownership dispute freezes 50 million deal. I didn't smile when I read it, but I didn't look away either. Actions have echoes, and this one finally reached them. My new office was small, but bright sunlight spilling across the polished floors each morning. A mug of cold coffee sat beside my keyboard the same way it always had. But now the code, the patents, the vision were all mine. I'd traded legacy for truth, and it was worth it. Sometimes I walked by the old Dawson Tech building. The sign still bears our last name, but the lights inside are dimmer now. Once I saw my father through the glass packing phone pressed to his ear. For a moment, I almost went in. Then I remembered the silence that used to greet me there, and I kept walking. There's a certain peace in being forgotten by people who only remembered you when it benefited them. My name is finally where it belongs, on the work, not the walls. They thought erasing me would end the story. Instead, it gave me a blank page. If you've ever built something only to watch someone else claim it, this story is for you. Tell me, have you ever had to fight for credit or choose peace instead? Drop your story in the comments. Subscribe for more true family betrayals and help others find their voice too.